All right, folks, here I am, sitting in my car, parked right outside our quiet little house, and I just came back from the police station. Yeah, that's right, the police station. And no, I'm not some guy with a shady past or a record. I'm just your average guy who thought he had a pretty normal life, a decent marriage, and a future he could count on. Now? Now I'm not so sure about anything. My name's Dave, and I've been married to Katie for 8 years. I'm the kind of guy who always believed in loyalty and staying true to your word. Katie, though, I'm starting to wonder if she even knows what that word means anymore. We met through some mutual friends, and things just clicked right away. She had this spark, this fire about her, like she was always the most interesting person in the room. I guess I fell for it hard. But over the past few months, I've been picking up on things, little things that didn't add up. At first, it was just the way she'd check her phone, always tilting it away from me, almost like she was hiding something. If I asked who she was texting, she'd get defensive, like I'd accused her of some huge crime. Can't I just have some privacy? She'd snap, rolling her eyes like I was some insecure idiot. But 2 weeks ago, that's when it all really started to unravel. She told me she was going out with her friend Lily for a girls' night. And sure, they did that every now and then, so I didn't think much of it at first. But when I saw her that night, my stomach dropped. She was dressed up, like really dressed up, in a way that I hadn't seen in years. New dress, high heels, lipstick like she was on her way to some fancy date. I asked her why she was going all out, and she just rolled her eyes and said she wanted to feel good about herself. I knew right then something was wrong. I didn't know what, exactly, but the pieces weren't fitting together, and I could feel it in my gut. Still, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. That was until last night, when everything blew up in my face, and I ended up at the police station in the middle of the night, trying to make sense of a life that suddenly feels like someone else's. And now, sitting here in this cold car with the engine off, I'm asking myself if I really want to go inside and face what I know is waiting for me. So, after that night when she went out dressed like she was heading to some high-end lounge, things started to get even stranger. Katie didn't come home until around 2 in the morning, which was way later than she'd ever stayed out with Lily before. When she finally walked in, she reeked of some floral perfume I didn't recognize. Not hers, not Lily's. And here's where it gets even weirder. Her lipstick was completely smudged, like she'd rubbed it off in a hurry. I asked her how the night went, and she gave me this look, like I was the last person she wanted to see. "Why are you still up?" she snapped, annoyed. I told her I'd just been worried since she'd never stayed out that late. She rolled her eyes and muttered something about me being suffocating. She said it so casually, like she was annoyed with me for caring. She told me I needed to get some sleep and not wait up for her like some clingy boyfriend. Katie, calling me clingy? That stung. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened. But her phone habits had only gotten worse. She was glued to it all the time, with the brightness turned down so low I couldn't see a thing on the screen. But one day, she forgot to bring it with her when she went to shower. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who usually snoops, but this time I was done playing Mr. Nice Guy. I picked up her phone and, of course, it was locked with a new passcode. Great. That's when things took another twist I wasn't expecting. Later that day, she mentioned she was heading to the grocery store, and something just felt off. I decided to follow her, feeling ridiculous for even thinking I had to. But here's the thing. She didn't go to the grocery store. I watched from 2 cars behind as she pulled into a little motel off the highway, the kind of place people don't exactly go to for a good night's sleep. I parked across the street and watched her get out, scanning the lot like she was checking to make sure no one saw her. Then, out of nowhere, a guy I'd never seen before pulled up in a black SUV, and Katie walked right up to him, smiling like she hadn't smiled at me in months. They exchanged a few words, and then, yep, they went inside together. I just sat there in shock. I mean, I knew something was wrong, but a motel? With some stranger? I'd expected to find texts or something, maybe an innocent explanation. But this? I didn't know what to do. I felt like I'd just been punched in the gut. My mind went blank. I barely even remember the drive home. She came back a few hours later, carrying grocery bags, like she'd actually gone shopping. She walked into the kitchen, all casual, and asked me if I wanted her to make dinner. acting like she hadn't just been with another man. I just nodded, too stunned to say a word. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, but I couldn't. I had no proof, just what I'd seen. And something told me to wait, to see if there was more. And let me tell you, there was. After that motel incident, I knew I couldn't ignore this anymore. But I also knew I needed more than just my word against hers. I'd seen enough crime shows to know that without evidence, she could spin it any way she wanted. So I decided to play it cool, act like I hadn't seen a thing, and start gathering proof. And that's when things took an even darker turn. Over the next few days, I watched her closely. She was coming home late almost every other night, claiming she was working late or meeting with friends. She'd always have some excuse, like her car had stalled, or she had to wait for a friend who needed to talk. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but it was clear she was lying, and her stories started to have holes in them. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I bought a small tracking device. I felt like some kind of paranoid detective, but I was desperate to know the truth. I slipped it under her car seat while she was taking a shower, my heart pounding so hard I thought she'd hear it from the bathroom. A couple of nights later, she said she was going out to meet Lily again. I waited until she left and then checked the tracking app on my phone. Sure enough, she was heading back to that same motel, but this time, I was ready. I followed her there and parked far enough away that she wouldn't notice. Then, while I waited, I spotted that same black SUV pull in again. My hands were shaking, but I forced myself to stay calm. This time, I wanted a closer look. I crossed the street and waited behind a dumpster by the entrance, hoping I'd go unnoticed. I got a quick glimpse of the guy when he got out of his car. He looked around my age, dressed way too well for a cheap motel, but there was something else. I realized with a shock that I actually recognized him. It was my friend, Jake. We'd known each other for years. He'd even been over to our house for game nights, backyard barbecues, the works. This was a guy I trusted. I felt sick. The guy I'd gone to for advice, confided in, and considered a friend, was the one sneaking around with my wife. I wanted to storm in there, to punch him right in his smug face, but I knew that wouldn't get me the answers I needed. So I waited, fuming, and about an hour later, they both came out, laughing and smiling like they didn't have a care in the world. I snapped a few photos of them together, just for good measure. I was done letting them think they were getting away with this. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment Jake and Katie had ever been together in front of me. The little laughs, the inside jokes I'd thought were harmless, all those friendly hugs. I couldn't believe I'd been this blind. The next morning, I decided to confront Jake. I texted him, asking if he could meet me for a drink that night, and he agreed, not suspecting a thing. Little did he know, I was ready to blow this whole charade wide open. I walked into the bar that night, feeling like I was in some sort of twisted dream. Jake was already there, sitting at our usual spot, looking calm and casual. I sat down across from him, trying to keep my face neutral, but I could feel the anger boiling inside me. We made small talk for a few minutes, talked about work, the weather, meaningless stuff. He looked at ease, like he didn't have a care in the world. But finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I set my drink down and just stared at him, trying to make sense of the guy I thought I knew. So, I started, my voice colder than I'd intended. Been seeing much of Katie lately? His face froze for a split second, just enough for me to catch it. He quickly forced a laugh, but I could see the nervousness creeping in. Katie? Oh yeah, just here and there. Why do you ask? Here and there, huh? I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. Like at a cheap motel off the highway? The color drained from his face. He stammered something about how I must be mistaken, how there was no way it could have been him. But his eyes gave him away, darting around like he was desperate to escape. Finally, he just slumped back, his shoulders sagging, and let out a sigh. All right, Dave. I'm sorry, man. I messed up. It just happened. I gritted my teeth, barely able to contain my rage. Just happened? You've been my friend for years, Jake. My friend. And now you're sleeping with my wife? Jake tried to justify himself, throwing out every excuse he could think of. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Dave. It started as just, I don't know, Just a stupid mistake. She told me things between you two were rough. I guess I thought, well, I don't know what I thought. I sat there, staring at him, feeling like I was seeing him for the first time. So that's what you told yourself, huh? That it was okay because we were having a rough patch? How long has this been going on, Jake? A couple of months, he admitted, looking down at his drink, unable to meet my eyes. I didn't plan on any of this. But Katie, she was unhappy, man. She said you didn't pay attention to her anymore. Unbelievable. He was trying to put this on me. So, that gave you permission to step in? You thought you'd do me a favor by filling in the gaps? He looked miserable, but I wasn't about to feel sorry for him. I stood up, throwing a couple of bills on the table, not even caring about the drink I hadn't touched. You can keep your apologies, Jake. You and Katie deserve each other. I left him sitting there, probably feeling sorry for himself. I wasn't interested in hearing another word from him. My mind was already racing ahead, wondering what I was going to say to Katie when I confronted her. But one thing was clear. There was no saving this marriage, not after what I just learned. And yet, the worst was still to come. I drove home that night with my mind spinning, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they hurt. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I decided there was no point in waiting. I wasn't about to let her keep lying to me while I knew everything. But, in a strange twist, when I opened the front door, the house was dark and Katie wasn't there. Just as I was about to call her, my phone lit up with a text from her. Going out with the girls again. Don't wait up. Love you. It was almost funny. The timing, the boldness, the sheer audacity of it. I decided to wait for her, to see what she'd have to say when she walked through that door. So, I sat on the couch, replaying every little lie, every excuse, every time I'd let my gut feeling slide. Hours later, just past midnight, she finally came home. As soon as she saw me waiting, her face shifted, like she knew the game was up. She tried to play it off, tossing her bag down and giving me a fake smile. "Oh, you're up late. Couldn't sleep?" she asked, but her voice had a nervous edge. I didn't waste any time. "Katie, cut the crap. I know about Jake." For a split second, her face went pale, but then, shockingly, she threw her head back and laughed. "Oh, so you finally figured it out," she said, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Her tone was icy, mocking, like she wasn't even sorry. That laugh, that smug laugh, set me off. "What the hell is wrong with you, Katie? You lied to my face. You went behind my back with one of my best friends, and now you're laughing?" She shrugged, unfazed. "Maybe if you'd actually paid attention to me once in a while, I wouldn't have had to go looking elsewhere. You're always working late, or wrapped up in your own world, Dave. I had needs too, you know?" Unbelievable. She was acting like this was my fault. I couldn't believe the person standing in front of me was the same woman I'd married. "So, you just thought sneaking around with Jake was the solution? Lying to me, sneaking around to motels?" Katie just smirked. "Well, maybe if you weren't so predictable, I wouldn't have had to. Honestly, Jake isn't the only one, Dave. There were others. I just got better at hiding it. It felt like the room was spinning. Others? I thought I'd come home tonight to confront one betrayal, but now she was tossing more confessions at me like they were nothing. I was speechless, just staring at her as she went on. "Oh, come on, Dave. Don't look so shocked," she said, crossing her arms with that same cold smile. "We both know this marriage has been dead for a long time. I just had the guts to go after what I wanted. I didn't even recognize the woman standing in front of me. It was like I'd been living with a stranger. I felt a mixture of rage, heartbreak, and a deep, numbing disappointment. The wife I thought I knew, the person I'd shared my life with, wasn't real. She'd been wearing a mask, hiding all of this right under my nose. I finally found my voice. "You're right about one thing, Katie. This marriage is dead. But not because I didn't pay attention. It's because you're a liar and a cheat." She didn't even flinch. "Fine by me, Dave. We're just better off going our separate ways." And just like that, she walked upstairs, leaving me standing there in the wreckage of what used to be my life. I was left with a million questions and absolutely no answers that made sense. But one thing was clear. My marriage was over, and the woman I thought I knew had never truly existed. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. I stood in the quiet of the living room, replaying her words in my head, feeling like I'd been gutted. I had no idea who this person was, this stranger who just dropped a bomb on my life and walked away like it was nothing. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I paced around the house, staring at old photos, clenching my fists as the reality of her betrayal sunk in. When the sun finally came up, I decided I needed answers. If there were other men, I wanted to know exactly what kind of deception had been happening under my own roof. Katie had left her laptop on the kitchen counter the night before, carelessly left open as if she had nothing left to hide. I hesitated, but curiosity, and maybe some twisted need for closure, won out. I opened her laptop and started looking through her files, her emails, anything that might fill in the blanks. That's when I found it. Buried in a folder titled Work Stuff was a collection of emails and messages spanning back years. There were messages from Jake, of course, but also from 3 other men, none of whom I'd ever even heard her mention. Flirtations, plans for hotel rendezvous, and even a few incriminating photos. It was like a complete timeline of her double life. And from what I could tell, these affairs weren't just one-offs. Some of them had been going on for years. But the messages weren't even the worst part. As I scrolled, I stumbled upon one email thread that stopped me cold. It was a conversation between Katie and a lawyer. She'd been consulting him about our divorce. Apparently, while I'd been busy trying to keep our marriage together, Katie had been plotting her exit strategy. The emails talked about splitting assets, selling the house, even dividing up bank accounts. She was gearing up to take everything and leave me with nothing. She'd been planning this for months. At that moment, any lingering sadness or regret I'd felt evaporated, replaced by a fierce, burning anger. She'd been weaving this web of lies, not just cheating on me, but scheming to take me down financially, too. It was like she wasn't content to just betray me. She wanted to completely destroy me. Just then, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Katie was coming down, looking fresh and relaxed, like she didn't have a care in the world. She caught sight of me at the kitchen counter with her laptop open, and her face went pale. "What the hell are you doing with my laptop?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "I could ask you the same thing about our marriage," I shot back, watching her face for any hint of remorse. But there was none, just annoyance, like I was inconveniencing her by finding out. Katie rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on, Dave. Don't be so dramatic. We both knew this wasn't working." "Not working?" I said, barely able to keep my voice steady. "You've been planning to divorce me and take everything, Katie. And all the while, you were cheating on me with 4 different guys. Who the hell are you?" She shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe I'm just the version of me you didn't want to see." That was it. I couldn't take another word from her. I grabbed my keys and stormed out, barely able to see straight. But as I got into my car, I realized I couldn't go anywhere. At least not until I figured out my next move. And that's when an idea struck me. If she was playing dirty, then maybe it was time I did too. I sat in my car outside the house, adrenaline still coursing through me, my heart pounding from the confrontation. Every part of me wanted to just drive off, leave her in the dust. But I wasn't about to let Katie win this twisted game she'd started. If she wanted to play dirty, then fine. I could play too. First things first, I needed proof. I wasn't about to walk into a legal mess without something to back up what I'd found. I pulled out my phone and took photos of all the emails, the messages, every little bit of her scheming I could find. I even took a picture of her lawyer's email address and wrote down the law firm she'd been talking to. If she was planning to go after everything, I wanted evidence to protect myself. After gathering my insurance, I knew I needed someone who could help me strategize, and only one person came to mind. My old buddy, Tom. We'd been friends since college, and if there was one person I could trust to give it to me straight, it was him. He'd seen me through every up and down in my life, and I knew he'd understand the full weight of what was happening. I drove to his place, the reality of my marriage's collapse weighing on me. Tom answered the door in his pajamas, looking groggy, but as soon as he saw my face, his expression changed. "Dave, what happened?" We sat down, and I laid it all out for him. The cheating, the divorce plot, the cold way she just shrugged it off like I was nothing. He listened quietly, His jaw clenched tighter with each word I said. Finally, he nodded. All right, man, here's what we're gonna do. He pulled out his laptop and started typing, looking up information about Katie's lawyer, gathering contacts for a private investigator, and jotting down advice he'd seen people give online. It felt like a war room, like we were planning a full-scale operation. First thing, he said, you're going to stay calm and act like you don't know any of this. Go home. Pretend things are normal. Let her think she's still calling the shots. The idea felt almost impossible, pretending everything was fine while I knew she was lying to my face. But Tom was right. If I let her see my anger, she'd know I was onto her, and that might ruin any chance of catching her off guard. Tom leaned back, a mischievous glint in his eye. Oh, and Dave, if you can stomach it, why not try to get close to her again? Make her think you're putting effort into fixing things. The more comfortable she is, the more mistakes she'll make. It was a hard pill to swallow, the idea of cozying up to the woman who'd betrayed me. But I nodded, realizing it was the only way to get the upper hand. And deep down, there was a dark part of me that wanted to see how far she'd go, how many more lies she'd tell before she thought she'd won. As I headed back home, Tom's plan echoed in my head. The marriage was already over. I knew that. But if I was going down, I'd make damn sure Katie went down with me. Once I returned home, I put on my best poker face, burying the fury I felt deep inside. Katie was sprawled out on the couch, her legs crossed, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had changed. I was supposed to be angry, shattered, but instead, I felt strangely empowered. I was no longer the victim. I was now a player in this twisted game. Hey, I said, forcing a casual tone. How about we order some takeout? It's been a while since we've had a nice night in. She looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Sure, why not? I could go for some Thai. As I called in the order, I could feel Katie watching me, trying to gauge my mood. It was a dance of sorts, an act I'd become surprisingly adept at. But the entire time, I was mentally preparing my next moves. I needed to gather more evidence, and I had a plan to do just that. I waited for the right moment to strike, knowing that the more relaxed Katie felt, the more likely she'd let her guard down. One night, while she was in the shower, I made a call to the private investigator Tom had recommended. I explained everything, the affairs, the lies, and the upcoming divorce she had plotted against me. The investigator assured me he could get the evidence I needed, so I hired him on the spot. With the PI on the case, I set up a plan to gather more information on her work trips. Katie had mentioned a conference in another city coming up, and I feigned interest. Maybe I'll come with you, I suggested casually. We could make a weekend out of it. She shrugged, trying to hide her surprise. Yeah, that could be fun, but it's going to be a packed schedule, you know? I smiled, masking my delight. I'll take my laptop, and we can explore when you're done. She didn't suspect a thing. The day of the conference arrived, and I went with her under the guise of being supportive. I pretended to attend some sessions while secretly keeping tabs on her. I stayed close enough to catch glimpses of her interactions with the other attendees. It wasn't long before I spotted Jake, one of her affairs, lurking around the venue. I tracked their movements, heart racing as I captured photos of them together. Katie laughing, leaning in closer to him, her hand lingering on his arm. It was everything I needed to show just how deep her betrayal ran. That night, after a long day of pretending, we returned to our hotel room. Katie was exhausted, collapsing onto the bed while I feigned interest in my laptop, pretending to work on something important. I couldn't let her see that I was silently gathering my evidence. After she dozed off, I took the time to review the photos and messages I had collected. My gut twisted with every snapshot. Each one was a reminder of how deeply she had betrayed me. I stayed up late, assembling everything like a puzzle until I had a clear picture of her deceit. When morning came, I knew it was time. I waited until we were back home, the atmosphere deceptively calm. We sat down for dinner, and I initiated what felt like an inevitable conversation. Katie, I said, keeping my voice steady, can we talk about trust? About honesty? Her eyes narrowed, but she played it cool. Sure. What's on your mind? I slid a few of the photos across the table. You tell me. Her face drained of color, as she processed the evidence laid out in front of her. "Dave, I can explain," she stammered, but I cut her off. "Explain? You've been sleeping with other men while plotting our divorce. How is there any explanation for that?" Katie's defenses crumbled. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I thought we were done. I was just trying to figure things out." I felt an icy calm wash over me. "You were trying to destroy me, Katie. It's clear now that I was never a priority. You've been a master of deceit, and I refuse to let you manipulate me any longer." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But it vanished quickly, replaced by the anger I'd been holding on to. "You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences," I said. With the evidence in hand, I took the necessary steps to protect myself. I contacted a lawyer to ensure my finances and rights were safeguarded. I was determined to fight back, to show Katie that her actions had consequences. She might have thought she could have her cake and eat it too, but I was ready to serve her a bitter slice of reality. As the dust settled from the confrontation, I could feel a heavy weight lifting off my shoulders. Yes, there was pain ahead. No one goes through a betrayal like that without feeling the scars. But as I started the legal process, I began to reclaim my life in ways I hadn't imagined possible. The first step was securing my financial future. I met with a lawyer who specialized in divorce cases. As we sat in her office, I laid out everything: the affair, the deceit, the documents I'd collected. Each piece of evidence felt like a confirmation that I wasn't just a victim. I had power, and I was ready to use it. The lawyer listened intently, then handed me a list of steps we would take to ensure my interests were protected. "Your marriage may be ending," she said, "but this doesn't have to define you. We'll make sure you walk away with what you deserve." Hearing that was like a spark of hope lighting up a dark room. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. While the legal wheels were in motion, I also focused on my emotional well-being. I started going to therapy, something I had always been skeptical about but knew I needed. Sitting across from a therapist, I began to unpack the emotions that had been bottled up inside me: anger, betrayal, sadness, and even the unexpected guilt I felt for wanting to end the relationship. Talking about my feelings, I realized how much I had neglected my own needs while trying to accommodate Katie's whims. One day, as I sat in that office, I found myself reflecting on the good times we had shared. I felt a twinge of nostalgia, but it was quickly overshadowed by the reality of her betrayal. It was a powerful reminder that I had given everything to a relationship that had been built on a shaky foundation. In therapy, I learned the importance of self-compassion and forgiveness, not just for Katie, but for myself. I was allowed to feel hurt, and I was allowed to prioritize my own happiness. With each session, I felt stronger, and I began to envision a future without her. I started picking up hobbies I'd put on hold, like hiking and cooking, and reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages. Their support was invaluable. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this battle. We would share stories and laughter, creating new memories that slowly replaced the bitter ones. I also took a hard look at my personal goals. I had always wanted to travel more, to experience life outside the confines of my old routine. So, I started planning a trip, a solo adventure. It was both terrifying and exhilarating to think about stepping outside my comfort zone, but I knew I needed it. I booked a flight to a place I had dreamed of visiting, and the anticipation felt like a breath of fresh air. As the legal process unfolded and I moved closer to finalizing the divorce, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Sure, there would still be days filled with doubt and sadness, but I was learning to embrace the uncertainty. I knew that I could rebuild my life from the ground up, creating something new from the ashes of my past. In those quiet moments of reflection, I found a renewed sense of self-worth. I was no longer defined by Katie's choices or the betrayal that had shattered my trust. Instead, I was reclaiming my identity, piece by piece. I had learned that love should never come at the cost of your self-respect, and I vowed to carry that lesson forward. Looking back now, I would tell anyone in a similar situation to trust their instincts. When the signs of betrayal start to show, don't ignore them. Fight back, not just for yourself, but for your dignity. Life is too short to settle for anything less than what you deserve. I emerged from the wreckage ready to embrace whatever came next, confident that I was finally free to write my own story.